Cisco Endpoint AMP Orbital CVE-2020-1472 monitoring. So this one here, the CVE-1472, right, is really focused on NetLogon elevation of privilege vulnerability. Why this is becoming noisy is that we're starting to see exploits around it. So Talos has talked a little bit about this here in detail. The vulnerability stems from a flaw in the cryptographic authentication scheme used by NetLogon remote protocol, which, among other things, can be used to update the computer passwords by forging the authentication token for a specific NetLogon functionality. This flaw allows attackers to impersonate any computer, including the domain controller itself, and gain access to the domain admin credentials. And then it talks more in detail about what this vulnerability is. Microsoft has released kind of a two-phased patch. One is it updates the platform, and there's a registry key available that you need to enable it to enforce secure logon or secure that logon. And then the second phase is going to have an enforcement of that. So they're going to make it mandatory when you patch in February. Other capabilities available on the Cisco side, you can see them here. They outline, how you can use certain technologies to mitigate your risk. In this case, it's showing you a firepower or snort IPS signature that you can leverage to help minimize your exposure to this threat. So the goal here is to use Orbital now to determine whether or not we're exposed within the organization, right? A very quick, easy way to run this against all our assets if we wanted to through a scheduled task, and come back with a disposition of how we sit, whether it's vulnerable or non-vulnerable. So I've got 3 systems, 2 Windows 10 boxes that haven't been updated for just a little bit, and then I've got a Windows Server 2016 domain controller that's been patched, fully up to date. And I'll go ahead and run this query, and we can see some hotfix information here for one of the hosts. That happens to be a Windows 10 host. Enforcement mode registry key data, we can see that they're all vulnerable, right? So we definitely are exposed. And so what you'd want to do is leverage GPO. I suspect I haven't read the details fully on how to mitigate the risk, but leverage Windows group policy, change that to enforcement, and then you should come back as not vulnerable. So let's run this query. Let's determine whether or not we come back as not vulnerable for that Windows 2016 domain controller. And there is the value of 1, and it shows as not vulnerable. So a pretty easy way to go out and evaluate your host to see whether or not you're vulnerable, what your position looks like, and then ultimately remediate that risk.